Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Now, everybody watching, all 5 of you, I appreciate you tuning in. It's sort of a weird, oh boy, it's sort of a weird time for me to be doing this. Normally, I do this in the evenings while I'm building. I just turn on the live stream and I interact with the chat. And I also have some times where I'll turn on the modular and I'll make some sounds. Today,
cool.
Last night I was doing that. We were streaming last night. This is a bit of, you probably can't hear this, Gaz, but
I can.
The patch from last night is still on the modular here. So if we need a musical interlude for any reason, it's up and running. I'm a bit under the weather, so the patch is kind of logy. I wanted something that felt sort of as mellow and as milky and down as I was last night. I'm feeling much better today, but the modular is still a little sick apparently. But that's okay. So we're just gonna talk a little bit. This is the first time that I've had anybody on the show, and it's not really a show, I guess, but this is the first time I've really had anybody on. And I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. I'm not an interviewer. I'm a synthesizer builder. But what I am passionate about is synthesizers, and I'm passionate about music technology. And I know those things are 2 things that are close to your heart as well. So
definitely
before we went live here, we were talking about what we were really passionate about is audio recording and talking about, and I started telling a story about how when I just started to get into music and I had bought my first drum set, and this was in high school. I must have been in 9th grade. About a month after I had the drum set, and I wasn't any good, but that didn't matter at all. What mattered was I realized there was this outlet, and this whole new me sort of arrived. So we went to our local music shop here in Pittsburgh, and I couldn't afford to buy one, but what we did was we rented a Portastudio, a 4-track Tascam recorder, and you could rent it for the month, and it was something ridiculously cheap. It was like $33 to rent it for the month. But in 9th grade, way back then in the late 80s, that was a lot of money, but it was an outlet for us. So it allowed us, we had this thing for a month. So what we would do is we would get it and we would record every day for 30 days. And at the end, what we had was an album. So we would do it and here's the album. And we did so many of these things. It was just for my entire 4 years in high school, every couple months we would go rent this 4-track and we would record an album. And the way we did it was we would just say, okay, hey, Saturday night at my house, we would show up, we would write a song as we recorded it, and then we would move on to the next thing. There was never any sort of notion of, hey, we're going to be a band or we're going to be alive. It was just whoever showed up, whatever instruments you were sort of inspired to play at that moment. We were lucky enough that we had, friends of mine had older brothers that were really, really good at different instruments. And so there was always instruments around and we could always sort of tinker and play with stuff. But that was that spark that, oh my goodness, I can create something out of nothing here and make it really, really fun and really, really interesting. And that's when I fell in love with the process. It's not the end result was almost secondary. It was really just the process of doing it. Was so fun, and the interacting with people and the way that ideas sort of, you put down a track and then someone says, okay, let me do a track. And they bounce back and forth and it ends up somewhere totally bonkers. But the process was so much fun. And maybe you have a similar.
Well, I mean, I'm getting nostalgic for that, even though I wasn't there. But but I mean, I love recording. Absolutely, I still do. But I mean, I am sort of pining for a Portastudio again, and we were chatting about this before. At the NAMM show this year, that's what I was looking for, to see if anybody was bringing back Portastudios. I mean, this sort of Tascam have got something, and Zoom have got something, and not a lot of others kind of go there. It almost feels this thing that because computers are so effective at recording, but one of the things that's really bugged me about the computer recording era has been that whoever's kind of in control of the computer is kind of too powerful. Like the mouser, let's call him the mouser. The mouser is like kind of, the mouser is kind of like, it's like kind of, well, they could make all these little kind of quick little mouse moves and just change things without it being part of the democratic process. You go out the room and What's changed? Whereas with the 4-track, everybody's kind of around the 4-track. It's a lot more. It is kind of more open to the sort of democratic process, really. Another thing with computer is the mouser typically has their back to everyone as well. Whereas like kind of with a 4-track, you might be sort of like kind of gathered. It might be on a table. You might be gathered around it, and I think just. Yes, for sure. You could imagine you can do this with a computer. You can, with a laptop, I guess you could sort of do it. But there's something about, there's something about the limits as well, which is still kind of useful in that you have, I like limitless stuff. I was saying this before. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I love the way that a computer is limitless in terms of track count and track length. And I trained as an audio engineer in the early '90s, and and working with reel to reel is kind of like a romantic notion. But the truth is, it's a pain. It's a pain in the bum when you try to actually kind of get stuff done. The art of tape hopping, being able to sort of stop without too much overshoot and just and be really kind of quick at the process of just operating the tape machine. But really, you start dreaming, oh God, I wish I'd love a machine that didn't have moving parts where I could jump in, and you go around in circles, and you kind of come to this idea of the laptop being the perfect device. But I think when you were talking about that little story there, I was thinking about how it was for me and my friends as well with the 4-tracks. And I had a little Roland 606, which I loved so much, and stupidly traded it in for this horrible digital drum machine in the early '90s. One of life's great regrets. But one of the things that was cool about the 606 was you could sequence an entire song. You could program it with all the fills, all the sections. So we'd make a complete song, and that kind of really helped with the songwriting as well, because we would kind of lock down the arrangement as we programmed a little sequence on the drum machine, and then that would be the first thing we would put onto tape, and then we had our song structure then. And I bought this really cool Marantz 4-track. I'd had a few 4-tracks, and they got this Marantz one, which was it had like round VU meters on there. It was a lovely thing. It also had really good the operation of it, and the fact you could set multiple memories. And
yes, that was a great machine.
Yeah, very cool. I've been actually having a little look on eBay to look at. But getting an old tape machine is full of problems, though, isn't it? They can be.
I've got one sitting on the shelf. I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
great. I've actually been thinking about getting rid of it. I have my father-in-law. He does, or he did. He's retired now, but he did voiceovers for commercials, and he was a DJ on a radio station for a long, long time here in Pittsburgh. And I always knew he had a small recording studio in the basement, but I never bothered to really go down there because it's a mess, and it's in a basement. I'm like, I don't want to bother. But the other day I was over there, maybe about 6 months ago, and he says, "Hey Rick, when your leg's feeling better, I have some stuff in the basement I'd like you to help me get rid of." And I thought, okay, yeah, no problem. What do you want to get rid of? And he goes, well, some of this stuff from the studio, it's just, I don't use this stuff anymore. It's just taking up space. It's heavy. I want to get it out of here. And, if I could sell it for a little bit, that'd be great. I said, okay, yeah, sure. I'll help you out. And so I went down there and I'm poking around, and I said, well, you have an 8-track reel to reel down here. What do you have that for? And he goes, oh yeah, I don't think that's really, you could just take that home. You could have that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I've been playing around with that, and he goes, yeah, I had it serviced a couple years ago, and it sounds fantastic, and that's fun. But he had all these sort of magical little things like that. But what I found was, I took this reel-to-reel home, and I was playing around with it, and I had a Tascam 344 years ago, but this was just a standalone reel-to-reel. And what I found was, you really have to, when you use it, it's about using it. the process is overwhelming for
Yeah.
someone to sit there and try to record and use it as a single person. It's difficult. So the actual process of using it becomes the experience of the recording. And for that reason, it's fantastic. You know, if you're doing, you know, the drones or sort of stuff on the Modular that doesn't really need to be synced, or it doesn't, that you're just looking for a way to add a little bit of that tape warmth or that atmosphere, it's absolutely great for that. But for professional recording or for studio time based recording, oh no, it's absolutely not the right tool for the job. But if you're going for this sort of Zen kind of, I'm going to turn on the 8-track and I'm going to play with the 8-track tonight, there's nothing better in the world, because it is a really gratifying experience. But you have to understand that it's probably going to be a little wonky and it's probably going to be a little fidgety here and there. And you just have to say, but that's why I'm using it, is because I like to solve those little problems, and it becomes part of your evening, and you just kind of have to go with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, like when you use the term like audio engineer, back in the day, where, well, certainly like in the 60s, you know, the engineers had to wear like white lab coats, you know, they were and they were engineers, they really were, and you had to be engineers to operate the equipment. And producers, they didn't touch the equipment at all. In fact, I did an album with this band in the probably about 15 years ago now, and the producer was a chap called Mike Hurst. Now, Mike Hurst was he had lots of pop hits that he produced. There was a band, like a kind of throwback 50s style thing called Shawaddy Waddy, who were really big in Britain in the 70s, and he produced all the Shawaddy Waddy stuff. But he did the Cat Stevens hits in the 60s, and he was, you know, he First Cut is the Deepest, P.P. Arnold, were really classic songs. So I was really thrilled to work with this producer, and but he was very much of the old school, and you know, I was doing literally like everything. And in fact, I would sort of turn to him and say, "What do you think about the balance of the snare and the kick?" He said, "What do you think it?" I said, "I think it sounds about right." Well, I think it's right then. and and really, he just liked to sort of just sit around in the control room doing Peter Sellers impressions and making everyone laugh. But that is an important role as well, though, because he was keeping the whole sessions buoyant and fun and keeping everyone enthused. And so producing in the old school, it was more about that kind of thing. And, you know, there was one point during that recording, I was changing some mic settings for the cello, and I needed him to sort of solo the cello mics for me. And I just was saying, "Mike, can you just solo the cello mic?" And I looked, and I saw his face. He was like frozen with fear. Like he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. And it also was like, oh, he's going to get like busted sort of for, but it was cool though, because I actually learned a lot from him, and just, you know, understanding that difference really between the producer and the engineer. You know, so now when people say that they're a producer, I'm saying, are you now? Are you a producer? You know, do you understand all the nuance and of the political situation that you have to kind of tread? You know, a lot of the time, a producer, really a good producer, is someone who can kind of understand the different egos involved and not upset them, you know, and make it a harmonious process, you know. And it's definitely political skills are needed to be a producer, you know.
So the reason that I had you on today is that at NAMM you had mentioned that you have a Modular case that is empty.
And here it is. Yes. Yes, I do. And it's scaring the hell out of me.
And you had talked to, and that's what you said at NAMM, that you weren't really sure what you were going to do with this thing or how to begin. So I thought today, if you had any questions on sort of Modular in general, of everything from the very basic to maybe the more esoteric, maybe I could help out, or maybe the live chat could answer a few questions for you.
Yeah, amazing. This is a great opportunity for me. So for many years, you know, because I've been on, you know, for people who don't know me, I've been on Sonic State on the podcast for many years and do reviews for Sonic State. And And I think there's been an assumption that I was like into eurorack, and I've been resisting, and I'm resisting and resisting and resisting. And actually, what happened? I was at the Audio Developer Conference a couple of months ago, and there was a quiz during the conference, and the team I was on won, and we won really good prizes. And the prize that I had was the Mini Brute 2 from Arturia, which good prize, nice prize. And the Rack Brute. So I've got the Mini Brute itself is a really good synthesizer. The version 2 is extremely good, much better than I was thinking, and is semi-modular. There's a big modular panel on there, and then the way that it integrates with the Rack Brute, because I got the carry bag for it as well, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I think for me, modular had seemed to be something which was like fixed, that you don't move around very much, and this is all very much about being able to take it places. So I was starting to think, okay, now this is interesting. Now, I don't know if you can see, but the rack is completely empty. And
I can see the corner of it there. Yeah, I can see the power headers.
Yeah. But the thing is, the Mini Brute 2 itself is a very capable monosynth in its own right, which, as I say, it's got a lot of patchability. So... yeah. The key bed is nice as well on the Mini Brute 2. I think they use the same keys as... I think they actually make their own key beds. I think they're unlike any of the other manufacturers in that respect. So it's the same key bed as the Matrix Brute. It feels really good. It's got aftertouch. And, of course, you can kind of patch all of that stuff out. So as the kind of controller system, the Mini Brute is the kind of hub of this particular system. So my first question... is, by already having a very capable monosynth, what would be the first thing to add to this to sort of immediately expand its capabilities?
Well, I'd have to take a look. I can't remember exactly what the Mini Brute 2 has in it, but what you could say is, well, what am I missing? Do I need another oscillator? Do I want a different style filter? Maybe a different envelope? Those are the really easy places to begin. Start with, when you're using the Mini Brute 2, you're like, oh, I wish it had this. Well, that's the first thing you get then. And that's great...
Okay, so the first thing I'm thinking of is effects then, because there's no effects. So,
yes.
So, and I love effects. So maybe that would be the way to go then. But like patchable... So that's quite intriguing then.
Yeah, patchable effects are interesting because in the modular world, you can then use the CV and the voltage to control them in interesting ways, and that's what makes having the effects in the modular, as opposed to just patching in a bunch of guitar pedals down the road, a little bit more interesting, because you can use the envelope generator to control the delay time. Or you can use use an LFO to modulate the reverb. That type of stuff is where you get really, really some interesting effects out of the modular, as opposed to just using guitar pedals. And there's also sort of hidden effects you can use as well. If you have a sample and hold, you can use that as a bit crusher. Little things like that you can just dive in and say, oh, yeah, I could run the audio through the sample and hold, and then use the gate, just use a secondary oscillator to clock it. And as you lower the frequency of that secondary oscillator, you're now changing the rate of that, and it crushes it. It's beautiful, because what you have is infinite fidelity, but so it's an analog bit crusher, essentially. Super nice. There's a lot of little tricks you can do to get those added effects. And I think modular excels at that type of stuff.
Okay, now you're talking. This is kind of this is whetting my appetite now. So I've got like a Behringer DeepMind 12 here, which the desktop version. Which one of the things I've really liked about that is the fact is the effects is fully modulatable by the it's not like most synths that have effects. The effects are kind of downstream of the synth engine, but with the DeepMind you can use the LFOs and the envelopes. And I started messing around with envelopes on delay times, and so I can see this actually being and I was really enjoying that. What I didn't like, though, it was very menu divey. That aspect of the DeepMind is all entirely in, and it's a really ugly kind of display as well. Okay, so here's a question then. One of the things with modular is this idea of the signal and the path that the signal takes, and then the fact that you route this signal and just send it on a kind of crazy journey. But it is more like that single, as opposed to like, say, like a polyphonic kind of setup. But I love chords. I really love chords. And I love chord sequences as well. So I would be quite interested to try. I mean, this is a monosynth, so I'd be quite interested in opening up polyphonic avenues.
Modular is not great at polyphony.
Right.
You can do it certainly, but just by design, it's if you want 3 voices, you need 3 of everything. There's ways to get around that. You can share a filter. But ultimately if you want 3 voices, you need 3 oscillators, you need 3 VCAs. If you want to trigger them independently, you need 3 envelopes. So your modular gets really big really quickly.
and then you've got to change every single thing to keep that voice.
Exactly. Right. So what I say to people getting into this is, because everyone starts with this, and I was the same way. When I got into modular synthesis, I started with a synthesizers.com system. They had I can't remember what they call it, but you basically pay a little bit of money every month, and over the course of the year, you get a modular. It's a great way to get in, but I wanted polyphony because I was the same way as I was coming from my Juno 60, and I'm like, I want to play chords, and this is going to be great. But what you quickly realize is it becomes so unwieldy to patch these things up. But if you want to change the sound at all, you have to change 3 spots, and you have to get them exactly the same, or they're not going to, it's not going to sound the way you want it. What modular really excels at is making really complex sounds. So they're monophonic, but they're extremely complex, and you can have them evolve over time, and you can use 7 oscillators to create these huge sounds. And that's what I think modular really excels at. And that's, I think, as people get into modular, they start with the idea of polyphony, but what they realize is maybe it doesn't really do that. But modular, once you start to use it, it pushes you in the directions that it's good at. And what you start to do is say, oh, okay, I can do a super complex sound, or I can do multi-timbral really well. And say, okay, so if you want to do, for instance, if you want to do a little drum machine, you can patch together a hi-hat and a snare and a kick. It does that really well, but it not necessarily polyphony. Now, that said, there's modules out there. You can absolutely get a MIDI to CV converter that'll do 3 or 4 voices, and you can get 3 oscillators, and you can absolutely do it. But what you find is that you end up compromising on the complexity of the voices. So the more voices you have, the simpler the sounds are going to be. Now, so if you're doing a modular setup and you have an oscillator into a filter into a VCA mixed with 2 other voices, couldn't you just do that with your DeepMind? Where modular excels at is saying, no, let's make this crazy signal path that does something absolutely unique and really interesting and use it that way.
Yes. So this, I think, this is really good. I'm glad you're saying this, because this is starting to kind of, I'm starting to kind of clear away a little bit of getting the more focus of what I need to do. So this idea then of taking the sound for a little journey, and going through a kind of whole bunch of, yeah. So okay, so let's take that then. So so if the sound is starting, say, or rather, I'm using the Arturia, the key bed, and there's a sequencer in here as well. So I guess the notes are starting from there, not necessarily using the sounds of the Arturia. Do you think it would be a good idea to be able to have a complete separate voice then that doesn't rely on the Arturia at all? So just to immediately break that, obviously you can patch between them, but rather than augment the Arturia, actually have like a sort of entire, to develop a completely separate sort of thing from the Arturia.
I think that would be the goal for the system in the end, but to get there, you would start by augmenting the existing, if you have an oscillator there and you can patch out of the oscillator, use that oscillator. It's, it sounds really good. And go from there. But ultimately, once you fill up the case, it is going to give you, you will have a separate voice, and you could add some effects, but add stuff that the Arturia doesn't already cover. There's no reason to buy that filter again if it's, you have it in there. So I can't remember what type of filter those guys use.
Steiner Parker.
The Steiner Parker filter. Yes, yes. Actually, I can't think of any eurorack modules that are Steiner Parker. I think Livewire makes a Steiner Parker filter.
Okay.
But, so stay away from what's already in there and just augment it with interesting new stuff in a way that ultimately, in the end, yes, you will have a separate voice, but as you're growing your system, hopefully slowly, you can use what you already have so that your eurorack is usable. Even if you only have 2 or 3 modules, you can augment it with what you have, and you have something that is enjoyable to use. Because ultimately, eurorack is sort of it's not the fastest way to get things done. What eurorack I think people like about it is it's deeply enjoyable to actually sit there and patch things around and play around with it.
Almost like a meditation, just a way of just being in the moment, and as opposed to using it as a tool for getting something done. Again, harking back to the computers are very, very good at getting stuff done. So rather than looking at that for getting your meat and potatoes, try and explore exotic gravy.
Yeah, a modular is not the tool you want to use if you're on a deadline. But
right.
In the evenings, if you're just trying to come up with something interesting, or maybe you're not really inspired, the modular is a great tool for just turning on a couple patches, and you're like, oh, that's an interesting sound, and your mind starts to go, and you're like, oh, what if I add this, or what if I add that? It's a great way to get you started. Yeah.
So okay. So I'm going to just take you back a point or two now. So where we were talking about when you mentioned, for instance, envelopes, and so there's 2 types of envelope in the in the mini brute. There's an ADSR and an AD envelope, and both of them are patchable. I do really like snappy envelopes. These are pretty snappy on here. But when you said about different types of envelopes, I was kind of curious about what kind of envelopes or that you might recommend that would be significantly different.
Well, for envelopes, there's a couple of different ways you can go. You can go with a simple different ADSR. You could pick a really snappy ADSR that's going to give you a super sharp attack. Most ADSRs, the circuit, the way it works is the attack, it'll have, the circuit by itself has a real sharp snap to it, almost an audible snap. And what most manufacturers do is you add a little resistor there, a little tiny value, maybe just a real small value. And what that does is it adds just a small bit of attack to it to get rid of that snap. So when people say it has slow envelopes, typically what they mean is they're just trying to roll that snap off. There are manufacturers, when we do it, where we really don't roll it off at all, because if you want that snap there, you can hit it really hard. But if you don't, you just dial in the attack just a tiny bit, and it'll roll away. So there are options out there in the ADSR format that do that. But you can also look at it, and I know Doepfer makes one of these, and an ADSR that's all voltage controllable. So the A, the D, the S, and the R. If you want something like that, where you want your envelopes to sort of be able to react to things, or if you want to hit them with an LFO and sort of change over time, those are options as well. On the other side of it, then you have function generators. And a function generator is going to give you sort of a different take, and more of a West Coast style take on it, where you can patch it as an attack decay, or an attack release, or an attack sustain release, you can cycle it and use it as an LFO. The problem with function generators is it does a lot of things, but it doesn't do any of them amazingly well. It does them, and you can use it for those things, but it's not necessarily... I always feel like they're not quite as musical as a full ADSR, but maybe that comes from I like poking around at the keyboard a little bit more than just sort of triggering stuff. But if you're using a sequencer or something like that, a function generator works fantastically. And for a small system, a function generator is a great option because it gives you multiple features for one module. So if you're not using it as a function or as an envelope, you can use it as an LFO, or you can use it as a voltage controlled oscillator. There's a lot of, or you could use it as a slew generator. There's a lot of options for a module. And that's why I think they're so popular, is because you can really, they're tools that can do a lot of different things. And I think in eurorack, you'll find a lot of modules like that, where here's this module, and on the surface, it looks kind of simple, but once you start to dig in, you go, oh, wait, this is deep, really deep. A good example of that is our 2+2 mixer, which sadly, we don't actually make anymore, but a really interesting module because it's 4-channel input, but each channel can be broken out as an attenuator. And that's useful because a lot of modules don't have CV attenuators, which is a crime, right, but that's another story entirely. But you can use it then as two-channel mixers, or a 4-channel mixer. And I'm not just trying to sell our module, but there's all throughout eurorack, it's kind of like this, is manufacturers and designers have packed in so much into each one of these modules that you're always surprised how much you get out of even what you would think would be a simple module, like a function generator or a mixer.
Yes. So, because there are a few on the Arturia. There are a couple of attenuators. So I'm kind of, delving into that sort of stuff a little bit. But I'm certainly being able to limit the CV, especially from that musical point of view, pitch modulations or whatever, just being able to have it moving within, realistic ranges. But in terms of like sexiness, what module kind of, where does the sexiness lie? What should I be kind of like looking for that's going to kind of make me kind of, well, I won't say it, but do you know what I mean? So where is the real excitement? Where is the excitement, do you think?
Well, looking back at my system here, I think you got to start with an oscillator. You got to start with a complex oscillator, something that was sort of designed for the eurorack format, and something that was designed to kind of take advantage of that. In our system here, I'd recommend something like the double helix oscillator, which is a sort of inspired by West Coast synthesis, but not sort of locked into that workflow. But what you have is two oscillators, and the idea is that they can cross-modulate in multiple ways. And, other manufacturers there's a ton of versions of these. A lot of are clones of the Buchla 259, and a ton of manufacturers make these. But they, a ton make them because they all sound really good. We sort of dove off in a different direction with ours, but the concept is the same, where you have two oscillators with a lot of modulation between them, so you can do linear FM or you can do waveform modulation. So having that, and with the double helix, there's two VCAs built in, and there's a modulation matrix, so you could patch in, say, an LFO from somewhere else and just route it to a bunch of different places. There's also a low-pass gate built in. A low-pass gate is another one of those eurorack modules that I think is a sexy module. Is low-pass gates have so much character, and they have so much sound to give, and they shape the sound so much in interesting ways. That's a great place. And then also wave folders. Wave folders in eurorack really have come a long way in the last 3 to 4 years. People are doing really interesting wave folders now, and that's sort of new. Eurorack kind of started on the East Coast, with Doepfer doing what would be the Doepfer version of like a Moog modular style setup. But since then, eurorack has kind of shifted entirely towards West Coast, and people are now using eurorack mostly for experimentation and finding those sounds that they can't get in their matrix brute, and they can't get with their deep mind. So wave folders are another great example of that, where you can get these huge sounds and really warp sounds in ways that you can't normally do with a polysynth or even a retro style mono synth. So those are really some interesting places to start. And always, voltage controlled delay. You can't go wrong with voltage controlled delay. It's always going to sound really, really good.
Yeah. I do want to get a spring reverb as well. I've got my eye on the Dreadbox, the Artiphon thing, which is, have you seen that one with, it's got, I think it's 8 sine waves, and that looks quite cool. I love organs. I love this is I actually love church organs. I've got a bit of a passion for church organs, actually. I think they can, and well, I've heard there was this one in a cathedral in Paris called Saint Eustache. Sadly, the organist who he just died last year. But I saw him perform there about 4 or 5 times on this, and he'd redesigned this organ, or he'd modified it to his. And he'd been playing this organ since 1964, and I've never heard music quite like it. I mean, I think it's about 5 manuals on this organ, and he'd also be tap dancing across all the bass pedals, and he would be pulling out all the stops. Is that where the expression comes from?
Yeah.
For pulling out all the stops, because you're playing this crazy music. And it sounded like the future still. And I was kind of thinking, God, it's very easy to think of like an organ in a cathedral as being this old thing, this really like old. But this music was, I would actually say it was life changing for me, really. I really blew me away. I thought it was intensely psychedelic. Something that was particularly cool about that thing, though, was you could play with these enormous like bass notes, and he would play short bass notes, and he knew the exact time that it would take to bounce and come back. And I realized he's not just playing the organ; he's playing the building.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was kind of going, and essentially organs are additive synths, aren't they? Really, it's sort of, what they are, I guess. So when I saw that module, I was thinking, okay, that kind of brings a bit of my love of sort of organs into like a kind of Eurorack module. So that's something that's caught my eye. So, and that's also got a little spring. You can put a spring tank on it too.
Yeah.
So I think
another module in that line, that sort of vein would be Verbose has a harmonic oscillator, and it's the same idea. It generates a sine wave, but then you have the 8 harmonics after that you can bring up with sliders. So just like an organ, you're adding those harmonics in. Of course, because it's Eurorack, then you can cycle through them and you can do all some interesting things with those harmonics. Really, really interesting sounding module, really good sounding module that I think is going to get you in that direction.
This sounds cool.
It's a little bit more organized. It's one oscillator that has the harmonics instead of the antiphone, which is a bunch of different oscillators that you can tune. These are always sort of tuned as harmonics, but more organy than the antiphone.
Okay, so that's the thing, I suppose, then, isn't it? I mean, obviously, an organ is very, very polyphonic as an instrument.
Sure.
But I just sort of like just taking this one note, but being able to have it undulating and moving and having all the harmonics kind of, okay, I'm seeing that's going to be, I should be taking notes. I'm going to have to watch this blooming thing again. It's just a wealth of info coming. This is great. Okay, so so again, because I've got this thing which is relatively, very mobile, and I've got the carry bag for it as well. I'm anticipating using it live in some sort of ways as well. So that might influence some of the modules as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And something, actually quite nifty, the design on this is a little, you've probably seen it, but as you close the lid together, there's like little feet that come down. That means that you can leave it patched.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the people I know who perform live don't do hardly any patching live. I was kind of curious about that, whether to be looking to be building a patch and then sort of like not changing it hardly at all and only making very small adjustments, or if that's kind of not the spirit of things, whether I should be, every time, typically with a lot of my mono synths, I'll have the default position where I'll just go, right before I start, I'll just set everything to a starting position. But that's like a lot more work on Eurorack though, isn't it?
It is, it's not the best format for live performance, certainly for something that you need to repeat night after night. When I perform, what I do mostly silent film soundtracks, so I will sort of show up and kind of perform to the movie. But the performance ends up being me playing the modular, so to speak, and me patching live. What I normally do is I will have kind of two modulars set up, and they may all be in the same case, or it may be two separate cases, but I can then bounce between them. So as I have one sound going, I can start working on the next, and then back to that.
Right.
And that's one way to do it. And then the other is, well, this is the sound I use in the third song in our set, so it's going to be ready to go. So when I'm playing live, I can just jump to that, and that's the sound. Then if you need to tweak it a little bit for the next song or whatever, just like performing live at all, there's no real rules, and I don't think there's any spirit. Anyone that's embracing modular is embracing it because it's so malleable and it's so controllable, and you can tweak it and do exactly what you need to do with it. And that's sort of the magic of it. So if for you need to patch something up the night before or the week before and have it sort of, this is the patch, and use little zip ties to make sure the wires stay that way and all that, because you're going to use it live and that's how you use it, then that's why this instrument was designed, because you designed the instrument for your purposes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? There's
the
idea of modular is you're creating something to help you get what's in here out to people. And so however you do that is the right answer. There's no, it works better this way or that way, or people are going to judge you based on this and that. No, it's modular for a reason. So you can build what is in here and get it out there.
Cool. So, I mean, when you're saying that, then actually that was interesting about having like two zones and being, it made me think then about kind of a mixer module. Then what would be, like, so obviously I've got the one sound would be coming from the Arturia. I say the one sound, but like having, do you have like a master module then that has like maybe balance line outs for gigs or something that would be the kind of the destination for everything, and maybe even being able to modulate those return levels. So if you've got different signals coming in, is there something like that?
Oh, sure. There's there's a ton of output modules out there in every conceivable format. If you want balanced, you want unbalanced. If you want quarter inch, you want eighth inch stereo. You know, there's a million different modules that'll get you the outputs that you need for your system. The stuff we do is all based on eighth inch jacks, because we figured, well, if you want a quarter inch, you just get an eighth the quarter inch cable. It's no big deal. But there's a ton of options out there. And then on the mixer side as well, there's a million different, well, maybe not a million, but 10?
Lots.
I don't know. 10, yeah, there's
it went from a million to 10.
Okay. And there might not be 10. I don't know. But there's certainly more than I can think. You know, I can think of at least 4 right now in my head. So we'll go with 4. There's 4 to choose from, but there's a lot of different sort of system mixers, as I would call them, or a module that would be your master mixer for your system. And depending on how large your system is, would depend on which mixers sort of suit your size. WMD make one that's really, really nice, and it's huge. It's really, really large. In your case, it would take up half your bottom row. So it's probably, you know, something like that's probably a bit overkill. We make a much smaller one for smaller systems. As far as modulating then return levels and this and that, you know, that's what VCAs are for. And that's why, you know, in eurorack, they always say, you know, you can never have too many VCAs. And it's absolutely true, because if you want to modulate the level of something, you just run it through a VCA and then you can modulate anything. So it's always good to have sort of standalone VCAs at the ready that you can patch. And, you know, whether you're modulating audio, you can also modulate CV. So if you want to modulate CV, just run it through a VCA and there you go. So you have to think sort of more modular about it. You don't necessarily need all these things built into a module. If you have the basic building blocks available to you, you can create whatever you're trying to do.
Okay, interesting. So I'm still, I think that might be a key thing that you've just said then, because I think I'm still kind of thinking of this kind of like continual path, rather than having like lots of things that can optionally jump into that path, rather than necessarily finding. So you said having like VCAs. How much difference is there between different VCAs then? I mean, surely a VCA is just a VCA. I don't see how that could have a huge amount of effect.
Well, different VCAs have different sounds, and if you're using them for CV, you might want a different response. But for audio, you know, using it for audio, you know, some of them have, you can overdrive them. Some of them try to add some warmth by, you know, adding a little bit of overdrive at the high end. Some of them are just poorly designed and don't sound very good at all. And some of them are super, super clean. It really depends on kind of what you're looking for as far as sound-wise and budget-wise, because, you know, the price range for VCAs is all over the place. You know, you can never go wrong with starting with something that's going to sound good, and it's going to be fairly priced, like the Dope for dual VCA module. It does exactly what it says it does, and it sounds really good. We've made a dual VCA module for years that it sounds super, super clean. And I think that's a module that kind of everyone makes. Our module is based off of the 2164 chips, which is a quad VCA chip. Chip's been around forever. Our VCA module is not too far from the datasheet VCA. We tweaked a little bit, and I suspect most manufacturers are doing something relatively similar. Now you can get sort of OTA transistor-based VCAs if you're looking for more flavor, but there's a lot of options out there.
Okay, this is cool. And so when you're saying about like using VCAs for CV, I mean, God, I'm really aware of just what a blooming beginner I am here. I'm going to say some really stupid things here. I mean, I've been playing around with synths since the 1980s. In fact, my first synth was I had in 1987. So, you know, I'm not like a big. I don't know. It's a bit weird, really, how I feel. I do feel this definitely taps into something where I do feel a little bit nervous about some aspects of this. I don't know if this is something that other people experience, but, you know, just being a bit nervous about the whole. Well, like something I still haven't done with this yet is work out how much power I've got, and then are you meant to kind of keep a tally of all the modules and just write down how much power each one does, and just sort of make sure that you don't exceed your power kind of capabilities? And
that's a real issue in eurorack. Some of these smaller cases with cheaper power supplies, definitely you run into problems where your modules, especially if you're using a lot of digital modules, you just kind of overwhelm the power supply, and then you'll see, you'll start to see symptoms that can be a little, maybe the oscillators, if you have analog oscillators, maybe the oscillators don't quite track properly anymore, or maybe you're starting to hear some bleed that you feel like shouldn't be there. Little things like that, it'll just start to creep in, and that can be a symptom of an underpowered case.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, so do people keep a tally then, or do you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of people keep tallies. You can build, if you use modular grid, you can build your system. Now, it's debatable whether the power consumption ratings on modular grid are accurate, but it's certainly a good place to start. But starting out a case, I wouldn't be too concerned with that. I would focus more on what tools do I need to kind of achieve the goals I'm looking for, and power should be less of a concern. I know with our cases, we go out of our way to make super beefy power supplies because we ran into the problems with our original case line was designed for all analog modules, and it worked great if you had all analog modules. But what, of course, is maybe 6 months after we started shipping these things, all these small digital modules started coming out, and what you realize is, wait, I now have a case with 10 computers in it, and technically on paper, it should be able to power it, but what you don't realize is when you turn on your case, all those CPUs, they all have power spikes, and if they all power spike at the same time, they're not all going to turn on, or you're going to see some problems with the analog stuff. So we, years and years ago, went and solve that just by saying, let's throw so much power at these things that it's never an issue. And I suspect with all these small Meanwell chips now that are available, most eurorack manufacturers are doing relatively the same thing. These small cases, what I see when I look at the specs is, I'm like, okay, that's enough power for that size case. So your case is, it's a smaller case, so it probably has more than enough power to power whatever you're going to put in there. Now, I wouldn't take that power supply out and put it in a larger case, but for that case, I'm sure you're totally fine. But going back to a point you said earlier about sort of being a little intimidated and a little scared of this, I felt the same way when I got into modular. I had like I said before, I started with .com, and I'd had synthesizers for 10 or 15 years. I'd been playing synthesizers. I had my Juno 60, and I had all the pretty much everything that's ever come out. It's sort of crossed my path at some point, and I understood how they worked, and I was able to use them, and it was very productive, and I enjoyed it. But I got this modular, and I didn't know how to do it. I had like, wait a second. So you patch the oscillator into the output, and you're like, oh, when I press a key, nothing happens. It's a real thing. So it is intimidating because what you don't, with these synths, the polysynths or even a monosynth that you buy, you don't see the behind the scenes. So all the stuff that you assume happens, like when I play a key, why doesn't the pitch change? Little things like that seem like it should just magically work. You realize, oh wait, no, there's a voltage that controls that. Or why doesn't the oscillator stop when I let go of the key? I'm running through the filter, and the filter's doing the filter thing, and the output's doing the output, but it's always making a sound. Little things like that, you realize, oh wait, a VCA is an incredibly poorly named module because it's not an amplifier at all. It's an attenuator, but it's what shuts the sound off. So these you find these little things that I sort of understood what the VCA did within the context of a monosynth or within the context of a polysynth. But when you start to patch things together for the first time, you realize, oh, no, this is what it really does. I get it now. But all that stuff, I could see how people are a bit hesitant, or it can be a little bit overwhelming. But as soon as you start to patch, all that falls away immediately because it just opens up to you, and you realize, oh, I see how it works. And So the first 2 or 3 times you patch, you have sort of all these magical little moments that become the foundation of, that's the base of Modular, that then you can add all the knowledge you have from all these other synthesizers you've worked with over the years, and it immediately then opens up to you.
Yeah, that's cool. Because it was making me think then as well. Well, when we were talking about digital, I love sampling, so I would definitely love to get some sort of sampler in here. And I love granular too. And I mean, I know Clouds, or they don't make it anymore, do they? But I think other people are making something. Something like that. I think I really love this kind of hybrid digital and analog kind of sort of system. So I definitely think I would like to be looking along those kind of lines. But do you have any samplers in that rack behind you? Anything that?
No,
is that purely analog rig?
This one is a mostly analog. All of our sequencers and stuff are all digital, but the audio is all analog. We've never done a sampler. People have asked us to do samplers in the past, and I've had some sampler modules sort of pass through in the past but what I found is I never end up using them. I love the idea. Just like an MPC. I bought an MPC. I was like, I'm going to sample my modular and it's going to be awesome. And I did it once. So it doesn't fit my workflow, my personal workflow. I love that kind of stuff. And granular, I love the idea of that stuff. But what I find for me personally is most of my time with a modular is either spent, working on it or, explaining it to people. So in that context, I feel like I should be doing it on my stuff, so to speak. So I always I get these modules from other guys and I'll put them in and I'll use them. And I'm like, oh, this is great. But what I find is I never end up long-term using it more than, for a couple weeks. And I always kind of come back to my stuff. But I know there's a ton of great granular stuff out there. And I know there's some really interesting samplers out there as well. And it does give you you were talking about effects earlier. There's nothing cooler than using a sampler as an effects unit. There's a lot you can do with that. And because you can create such complex sounds with the modular, it's a great combination.
Well, I do have an Octatrack here, which I love, Electron Octatrack. So maybe I think I'm keeping falling into this trap though of trying to make the modular a little bit like a combination of all bits of kit that I've already got. Although, as I say, because I've got it as a portable rig, taking that and the Octatrack, well, then again, the Octatrack isn't big, is it? Perhaps I should just not think about that and go, if I want to do any sampling, use the Octatrack. If I want to sample the modular, plug it into the Octatrack rather than having a sampler inside the modular.
I think what it comes down to, and a lot of people getting into eurorack have the same questions you have and sort of the same ambitions that you have, but it's very important to let eurorack kind of guide your journey. So what I recommend to everybody is start small. Just get 2 or 3 modules and learn them and build them into your workflow. So build on this, the mono synth that you have and sort of add to it. And very quickly, you'll kind of understand, okay, this is what it's good at. This is what I'm interested in using it for. And then add some modules and move in that direction. So instead of trying to plan out your entire case before you buy anything, pick a few modules that you find interesting. Maybe, the antiphone. Start there. Just get that and say, okay, I'm going to use this, and maybe get, an effects module or something. Just play around with it and say, okay, where is this pushing me creatively? How am I using this, or what am I interested in using this with? And that's going to guide your choices after that. Once you get over the fear of, I have this large case, I'm not exactly sure how to do this. Once you get beyond that and you start to use it in a basic sense, it becomes a very organic process, and all that fear and everything sort of washes away. And it's like, oh, nice. The next choice is obviously this. And you know what it is. And that way you're not wasting a bunch of money buying a bunch of modules that you're going to end up selling because you realize, oh, that's not what you're using the modular for at all. So maybe down the road there is a sampler in there. Maybe that there is something like that. But start simple and let it guide you.
But I guess there is something, and I'm sure this is something people will relate to. When you've got a big space, you just want to fill it. It almost the holes are just kind of it's just like feed me, fill me up. So having all that, I mean, yeah, it's sort of like, because when I look at this, it's just like a big gaping hole. I have got a confession though. I'm gonna have to say this confession, because I am going to do a little series on my YouTube channel, charting my Odyssey, if you will, my Eurorack Odyssey, starting with the empty rack and then building it from there. But I do have a module which and this module does actually excite me quite a lot, and I think it will influence where I'm going to go with it. It's a dope for A119 external input.
Okay.
This is great in terms of I can plug my bass.
Yeah. Does that I don't know that module specifically. Does that have an envelope follower on it?
It does as well. Yeah, it's an envelope follower, and it'll kind of and you can either put a line into it or a kind of low it, like a weak signal. So it means then that because I'm a bass player, that's my passion and love, it means that I can connect in that. So I haven't mentioned that because maybe I'm going to have to just do my first, I've blown it now because I was going to film. Because I know now someone's good. If I start and say, I've got an empty rack, someone's going to say, no, you haven't. So maybe I'll have to. But anyway, I thought that is quite an interesting starting point for me as a bassist, meaning that, and that could influence the modules that I get as well, just because certainly the effects. I mean, I quite like the idea of, I say plugging my bass in and just really having it doing all kinds of interesting things.
Oh yeah, and I think you could spin this as, that's for you being a bass player, having an input with an envelope follower. That's not even a module. That's just basic. That's a basic tool. That's just part of the case. You need that to do what you want to do. So I don't think I don't think anyone's going to mind that too much at all. But that's a great starting point, because you can do so much with that. The envelope follower is critical because that allows you to then, even if, and I've done this in the past, even if you're not using the audio from the bass, just using the bass as a controller to create envelopes and to affect whatever's happening in the system. I used to do that with my drums all the time, where I would take the triggers from the drums, not to listen to the drums through the modular, but just to have the drums affect whatever the modular was doing. It's like a great way to interact with it. That's not, a basic MIDI keyboard. I think you'll have a lot of interesting experiments with that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm quite excited about that. I mean, sorry about the subterfuge there. But yeah. So okay, I'm starting to think about where I want to go with this now. So yeah, I'm Tiffon. That does the spring side. I definitely want to get a spring. I remember years ago, I was fortunate enough to have someone had lent me a VCS3 for a few months, and I loved that thing. I mean, I didn't really understand it. I still don't particularly, but I had a lot of fun. And in fact, I think this is something, and I wonder if this is something that other people can relate to as well. I sometimes overthink things instead of just doing stuff. I'm thinking too much about what I'm going to do rather than just plug and just not be too worried about it. I'm thinking too hard about it, going, oh, where do I want to do? What do I want? Rather than just seeing what happens if you just try chuck it in there. Just to see what I mean. That's sort of being a bit too cerebral and maybe not sort of not. Maybe that's a fear thing as well, a little bit. Just
it is certainly as a musician, you have a certain you feel like I'm good at this. I should know what I'm doing, and it should sound good every time I do something. As a synth performer, I have that. When I do these live soundtracks, everything is live all the time. So if I make a bad patch, you're going to hear it. But what you have to realize is they don't know it's a bad patch, and the beauty of Modular is sort of experimentation. So yeah, just pull it out and poke it in somewhere else and try it there. You're not going to know what it's going to do until you try it. And because of Modular, even if you're using the same 3 modules, and you've patched something into something else in a similar way many, many times, depending on how it's being modulated or depending on the signal path, that same patch cable may do something completely different. So you absolutely kind of have to just dive in and expect it to sound terrible sometimes, or expect it to not do anything at all sometimes. But that's totally okay, because ultimately you just pull out the patch cable and patch it in somewhere else. It's not a big deal. You kind of have to get over the idea that everything has to sound perfect. And certainly in eurorack, because it's just outputs to inputs, it's going to sound bad a good portion of the time. But you know what? It's kind of part of the learning process, and it's part of the fun. I got into this because I love the idea of kind of feeling like a bit of a scientist, or you're trying to hear things that have never been heard before. And to find those things, to be an archaeologist and to dig around, most of the time it's going to be kind of boring, or it's not going to be that wow moment, but you have to dig through. And then when you find those wow moments, you kind of scope it out and say, oh, this is okay, this is how I did that, this is why it's interesting. And you learn a little bit, and you put that in the back of your head, and you move on to the next thing. So in the evenings, I'll do these experiments where I use a Modular. I don't record it too often, but what I'll do is I'll just put headphones on in the evenings, and it's sort of this meditative experience. I want to listen to the sounds, and I want to hear the weirdness in the little strange things. And I'll poke around, and if I find something nice, I'll just tweak it for, half an hour or 20, and just moving the knobs around and seeing what it sounds like. That's sort of the pleasure of it. But then I've also stuck that in the back of my head and said, okay, when I am performing next, I have this patch, and I know why it's doing this. And it's not just patch this into that and patch this into that. It's why is it doing that? And I have an understanding of that I can then on the fly patch up something that hopefully is interesting to other people, because I understand why it works, and not just a basic patch this to this and you get this sound. So it's beyond sort of understanding a preset of a patch, and it's moved on to understanding why the patch is doing what it's doing. And once you have that basic understanding, you can then patch up something that you're confident with when you're trying to share it with other people.
Nice. Is there any absolute, do not ever patch this into this, that because you'll cause a signal? I mean, obviously I know what would be the worst thing to do patch wise? Can you damage? I mean, obviously plug in and out into another out, or
no.
Is there anything
you're not going to cause any problems? When I was younger, my friends and I would go. In our houses, our parents would all have old speakers sitting down in the basement, sort of in the corner or whatever. So we got into the habit of we would just plug the wires into the outlets in the wall, and watch the speaker just go pop. They wouldn't work again after that. But so we had a few weeks where we went around to every one of our houses and did that. But in the eurorack world, no, there's nothing. Outs to outs, ins to ins. You're not going to cause any problems at all.
Right.
The voltage is low enough that nothing's going to happen. And because they're all sharing power supplies, they're all sharing ground, everything's going to be fine.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. I mean, I think I have been a little bit overly cautious in that area. I mean, obviously you want to have some semblance of knowing what you are plugging in. But, just if it was I was just kind of imagining live in a dimly lit environment, and just sort of, Okay, that's cool.
That would be fantastic. Maybe you could get a module that just does that.
This just makes my hair go out. That's amazing to like modulate. Woot, woot. Yeah.
I think I know what our next module is going to be.
That's an amazing idea. Because I suppose you could do it, couldn't you? Like if you had like some sort of like, like a Van de Graaff generator or something that was then sort of, but that was modulating. Ooh.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people, maybe not that specifically, but that's why people get into Eurorack, because they start to think and they have all these crazy ideas, and Eurorack is, you can DIY into it so quickly and make these crazy things a reality that I think a lot of artists are really into it. And they say, oh, well, you mean I can tap steel sheets with it, or I can do this? And absolutely, all that, the craziest stuff you can think of, if you have the skills to do it, obviously, you could certainly do all this sort of bonkers stuff. And that's sort of a side of Eurorack, but it exists. And a lot of people do that kind of stuff. And ultimately it creates really interesting art, which is hopefully the point of all this.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah. Because I mean, there is this thing, where maybe a certain percentage of people who like Eurorack wouldn't necessarily identify as a musician, or even the sounds that they make being music by conventional definitions, more sound design, shall we say, or just and I always say I think that's absolutely fine. I don't think you have to make music on these things, and you don't have to do anything at all if you just enjoy making sounds. It's sort of it's not necessarily, I mean, I always feel a pressure, and I know a lot of people do, when you've got a lot of kit. It's like, come on then, let's hear let's hear what you've done with it. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I make lots of music. I do a lot of things, but to be honest, a lot of the gear that I've got, I don't actually use on a lot of my productions. I mean, I a little bit, but a lot of the stuff I've got is just for like the playground. It's just just for having kind of fun. Actually, I quite like, I mean, at the other end of this room, I've got my sort of synth sort of setup, and I like I'm facing my computer area here, and this is kind of where I do most of my work. And then I like to take a bit of time out from that, go to the opposite end of the room, and just almost do anti-music, just and I think there's no shame in that, really. I mean, I think there is a definite there's the old saying, isn't it, all the gear and no idea, that people just like having stuff for boys and their toys kind of thing, just having. And I'm not really so bothered about having stuff to impress people. Like, look how much kit I've got. I know that a lot of people, you see it in Gear Sluts. I always think it's really strange when people post things and then there's like a signature at the bottom of their every posting which lists all of their all their kit. I always find that a bit strange, that mindset of people who want, that they're kind of trying to use their the fact they bought all this expensive gear as a way to sort of make their opinion matter more. It seems, I mean, a lot of the professional, I mean, I've been fortunate to work with some amazing, very well-known musicians, and they are not like that at all. It's almost like they would be, that's almost like the people who sort of want to do that are almost like the opposite of people who actually kind of do it for real. It seems almost like it's a way of a substitute of actually having done anything. It's more like going, here's my kind of my medals, or my my qualifying stuff that I that my opinion is important because look at my impeccable taste. Look what I've got. Sorry, going off topic a little bit there, but I mean, I think really what I was meaning there though is I think what I want, I don't want, I'm not looking for a trophy system of like, all the right things to impress people. I think that's what I'm saying. I think I want to, I love what you're saying actually though about this idea of just really creating your bespoke instrument. That's in some way is an extension of myself. That little dope for module, as I say, being able to plug my bass in and means that is a kind of like a path for me and my connectivity. I'm a vocalist too, so I can plug a microphone into that as well. So bring in some sort of voice stuff and processing voice is definitely something that I'd like to do as well. So again, things that can, using the voice as an oscillator, I suppose.
I think you're really going to find that envelope follower is the key to all this, and certainly the audio passing through and using your voice or using a bass or anything you have a microphone, just hitting the microphone against the wall, using that as an oscillator source. Absolutely, that's super interesting. But the envelope follower, I think, is where you're going to find sort of the creativeness comes into it, because using the loud, soft, and the sharp attacks or the slow attacks to create different effects downstream then is something that I think you're going to find. I find really, really interesting and really, really fun to play around with.
Yeah. I mean, I've got this thing here, if I can reach it. Do you know these things?
Oh, yeah.
The Leaf Audio microphonic sound box, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. I love this thing. Plugging that in through that doper and then bring in, and you can sort of, I've got a violin bow for bowing on these rods.
Nice.
And sort of I gotta say the preamps in this are really, really nice. It sounds, the sound quality that you get out of it is really, it's got a really nice sort of tonality to it. So taking things like that and that thing is designed as just a starting point. It's designed to be processed. So I definitely, that's the sort of, so, and I've got a whole bunch of weird and quirky things as well that I could plug in as well. Also, what else I got? This thing, the stylophone.
Oh yeah, those things are awesome.
The Generate, yeah, and this has got it's got a fair degree of patchability as well. So this could be integrated in some sort of way as well.
Anything with patch points is going to treat you well. That'll be a lot of fun. And I think that's a good way to approach this, because I know you like to use the smaller little boxes, and I'm the same way. I love having those small little boxes that kind of do one thing, and they're kind of fun to play with, and you could sit around and have it on your lap, but then you get an idea, because this thing you're playing around with it on your lap, you can pick it up and put it next to something else and start building on that. And I think the Modular is a nice approach, because you can plug in these little things then into the Modular and expand on whatever idea you started to toy around with these smaller little boxes, and hopefully that inspires you to create a whole song or to create a soundscape or whatever you're sort of in here that you're trying to pull out that day. That's kind of the idea of the Modular, and hopefully, all these little things going in through the audio input and processing them, you'll be able to get some interesting sounds out of it. You'll probably get some terrible sounds out of it too, but hopefully, as you sort of find your way down the rabbit hole, and I think you will find it interesting, because you do like these small little sort of, they're not toys, but these sort of small little machines. And that's really all a modular is. It's a collection of these small little machines that you can kind of tie together to create other little machines.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, so I've got all the pocket operators, all things like that as well, which all could sort of, be brought into some kind of purpose. But here's another thing I have been thinking about. I do have a Behringer Neutron here as well. And I could rip that out of its. That is eurorack mountable as well. But I just I haven't done it because I thought I was going to take up. It's going to take up like 4/5 of one of the rows of the, and it seems a bit of a shame to have when I've got the kind of I've got the mini brute and all that the mini brute can do, and then it's got a decent sized patch panel on the
that might be an interesting experiment, even if you don't take it out of the case and put it in your eurorack case, just to spend the day, put your audio input, your Doepfer module in the case, and then just experiment, have them side by side and just make a patch with that. You have a modular synthesizer already with the mini brute and with the Doepfer thing and with your audio input. You have all the tools. Now
I got my Erebus as well.
Oh yeah, just get some patch cables. I'm sure you have some patch cables lying around. And just patch in and start to see how this thing treats you, and start to see what's missing or where would I like to take this that I can't go.
That's a great idea.
Don't feel like you need new tools. You have a lot of tools there already.
Oh my God. I have a lot of tools.
Sure, the tools, they may not be eurorack in their format by default, but they're still modular. So, start using the modular and say, okay, what am I missing? What would I like to do? Oh, I want an effect. Okay, what effects am I trying to get? Now let's see what options are out there. But if it means taking this out and putting it in your case so it looks more modularly, if that in your mind says, okay, this is more of a modular and I want to do it that way, then pull it out and stick it in there for a while until, you run out of room with other modules, and then you can take it out. Or if you can have it side by side and that works for your brain as well. Because I know I'm picky about that stuff kind of too. If I'm doing with the modular, sometimes I'm like, you know what? I want it all to be in here. I don't want it to be in a little box next to it. Sometimes, that part of my brain's like, no, it's not right. It's not right. But so whatever you need to do to sort of feel comfortable using this and patching with, but just start patching with what you got, because you have a larger modular system now with just these two things in your audio input than, a lot of people get ever.
And when you start, I've got 2 Electron Analog 4s in here. I've got the Octatrack, I've got the Analog Rhythm, I've got the DRM drum thing. I've got a shed load of kit in here. And in fact, I have been saying for many years that my modular rig is, desktop units and and oh my goodness, lots of them. And in a way, that's been something that has actually been putting me off embracing the eurorack side of things, just purely because of the amount of kit. And actually, as I was saying earlier, the amount of kit that I look at and go, and it looks at me mean, and it's going, I've got a lot more in me than you've even, I've barely scratched the surface with so much of this kit, really. I'm fortunate. I am fortunate because a big part of my work is reviewing things, so I do, there's a lot of gear that comes in and goes, sadly. But some gear comes and gets to stay. And I'm always chasing, I've just done a bunch of reviews now and I've got a whole bunch more coming. So, so I'm always I've always got a lot on my plate in terms of bits of kit that I'm having to learn and kind of get to the bottom of, and I was, as I say, I was kind of thinking, oh my God, if I go into eurorack, then I'm just about managing to keep on top of things now. I know here's this, I've got a lovely book from Kim Bjorn, the Patch and Tweak book. terrific book. And I've been delving into it, and I thought, actually that's a really, really helpful book to have around. But actually, this today has been incredibly useful to me, because I feel now I've got I feel now I think I'm not going to go down the sampler route with it. I think I'm not going to go down a certain way. I think I'm going to leave that to my devices that do that sort of thing really well. I think I'm going to explore West Coast things. So that was really interesting. I think that's definitely something that I want to look into. Effects in any ways that I can manipulate my bass and voice and the whatever else I've got, but also just in steps and not get too much. Just try and I think the other thing as well, which I think is a really good thing, and I have been avoiding doing it, is assembling all my gear nearby. I've got some fairly long patch cables as well, so I'll be able to, and then try using parts of this with that, and just swapping out and making kind of, and that was a really good, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think it'll help me realize what it is that I'm looking for, because I think that's part of the problem. I just don't know what I'm looking for. I feel I know a lot more now, thanks to you, and this has been really, really, really helpful. And I hope it's helpful to some other people too, not just. Otherwise, I feel a bit self-indulgent just having you all to myself. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Should we be wrapping soon?
I think it's been about an hour and a half. I think we could. We've far exceeded the attention span of probably everybody on the internet. But it's been fascinating for me, and I love talking to you, because you have such an interesting approach, and you approach it from sort of several angles at once, which is, most people come at this, and 99% or 98% of our customers at Pittsburgh Modular are all hobbyists. So for them, they have something that, I want to do this in the evenings, and I need to do this because it's not what I do for a living, and so they approach it very differently than someone that, you sort of approach it from several points of view. You're a professional musician, but you're also you're media, and you're just generally, sort of a gear nut. And so you kind of have all these different angles, and clearly you're a hobbyist as well, or you would be.
Oh, definitely.
So it's interesting to talk to you, because I'm sort of getting all these angles at the same time, instead of just one specific angle from one person. So and I think, and you tell a good story too, which makes, makes a live stream interesting. But yeah, so I think it's been helpful, hopefully, for a lot of people out there that are sort of intimidated and may seem to think that, I need to start with this big thing, or I need to buy 10 things before I have a modular synthesizer. When the reality is, you have one sitting on your shelf already. And I bet a lot of people watching this have bits and pieces that if they just use a couple patch cables, they're doing modular synthesis. And that's the beginning of the road. Now, for some people, maybe, I don't need to do that. I just want to play the keys. Or some people are going to be like, oh, wait, now that I've used patch cables, I don't know how I could do anything else without them from now on. And that's interesting too. And that's the way I was. I started doing this. I'm like, everything needs patch cables. It's like, it just seems to me, I like to be able to see exactly what everything's doing. So I can do that with patch cables. I know, I can go back to this patch I did last night and say, well, I can't remember exactly what I patched, but I can follow the wires and see exactly what each sound is doing and pick up where I left off, which, something like a preset in my Juno 60.
Right.
If I move one slider, it's all gone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what was going on here? How do I recreate that? And you have to start from zero. So for me, but again, I'm coming at this from a hobbyist standpoint, because I'm not a professional musician. I do it sort of as a way to meditate in the evenings, and as a way to entertain myself, once the kids and the family go to sleep. So I'm approaching it from a very different standpoint. But I like the idea of if I can look at this from what I did yesterday, turn it on, it's going to do the same thing, and I can tweak it and sort of go off from there. So everyone has a different point of view, I think.
Do you use the colors cables to help you kind of navigate what you're doing, or is it just random what color that you use?
It is random what color I use, but I absolutely use them to help me navigate once I'm building, because you know, just like anything else, you could say, okay, I'm starting with a green cable, and it ends up, you can follow the green cable. And if they were all green, it would be a nightmare. You wouldn't be able to see what you're doing. A lot of times when I'm filming or when I'm photographing stuff, I'll use all blue cables, because blue cables photograph really well and they look really good on camera. But
that's interesting.
But when I'm patching and I'm trying to do something musically or sonically interesting, absolutely as many different colors as I can use, because it just makes it easier to understand. Once you have the layer of spaghetti on your system, it makes it much, much easier to sort of dig in and follow a patch.
The spaghetti kind of aspect is something, again, was one of the things, I felt I've been battling against cables all my life, and it's been mostly a hate affair, really, with cables. Really, really, really. Oh man, I just rewired my pedal board yesterday, and I was so frustrated because the way I wanted the pedals to be laid out and the cables I had a rehearsal in the evening as well, and I needed this board to be up and running for that, and like an inch. It was like an inch short, and I didn't have any other cables to do it. So I've had to redo the whole layout of the pedal board just for that one bloody inch. However, it was, actually it's all right now. I've got used to it. But I mean, changing my pedal board has been, I suppose, you see, in a way, building a pedal board. I've done pedal boards for years and years, and that's not dissimilar in a way. Lots of different modules essentially that you're kind of wiring in together, and of course I'm using the same power supply. I'm just seeing all the parallels now. It's not that dissimilar, that aspect. But I have to say, I do have, do you know the DPW, the Mug as it's called, do you know DPW Swedish, they make Eurorack, DPW design.
Yeah
Dan Wahlberg, he does a distortion, like a multi-band distortion. It's like a 4-band distortion, and you can get it as a Eurorack module. But I've got it in the pedal format on my pedal board, and the thing is unbelievable. I must have about 10 different bass fuzzes here, different bass distortions, and this thing is. It's like next level. It's incredible. I've had it on the board for a year and a half or so now, but yeah, I'm thinking maybe one of them in the rack. Yeah, but that's certainly, I mean, that's 4 separate amplifiers that are all kind of tuned amplifiers in the different bands, and from the kind of bass point of view, the way that dynamically responds to you playing, it really feels like it's got incredible sort of dynamic control. Like a lot of fuzz pedals, they just act as like mega limiters.
Yeah.
So, no matter how hard you play, you're kind of hitting, but this thing, it just reacts dynamically to your playing. It's beautiful thing. So yeah, I wonder how that would fare in the modular world. I'm definitely going to be intrigued to check that out.
Well, it would be interesting. I'm looking at it, but I can't really tell from the picture of it. But it looks like it has some modulation inputs. So if you could do some interesting modulation inputs with using the envelope follower, or using an LFO or something along those, or a little sequencer or something, I think you could get some really interesting effects that you can't necessarily get with the pedal, because there's no reason to get the module unless it does something that sort of expands on what the pedal's doing for you.
Well, it's on my pedal board, and the pedal board weighs a ton, and
I see. Okay.
And that stays downstairs. I mean, this is the thing, you see, it's almost not traumatic, but taking the pedal board, basically I had an Eventide H9 on the pedal board, which is an amazing pedal, but I've decided it's it was being underused, and I wanted that in my. In fact, I've got it in my rig in front of me now, and it left a space again. The thing of the space, the dreaded space.
Yes.
But no, I've got some. Yeah, I've got some cool pedals on there. Yeah. Anyway, that's another story.
Another day. Another day.
Yeah, another day.
Well, I think we should wrap it up. We've been talking now for. Well, we were talking for about a half an hour before we even started streaming. So we've been doing this for about 2 hours. And I think the hour and a half we've been streaming to the world, I think that's enough for today. But I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
Is the first time I've had a guest. I'm glad it worked. We had some trouble with the Skype at the beginning. But I'm going to continue doing this. It seems like people were watching, and I think people were digging it. Thanks to the chat and
loads. Apologies to the chatties. There's like an absolute wealth of stuff that's been flying past. It's been hard to kind of pay attention to it. But I'm going to go and have a little read through of all of that now, and so thanks to everybody who's tuned in and who's contributed as well. That's always a really nice thing there, and to be in. So apologies if anyone's actually been asked, trying to get our attention. It's quite hard. This is something that I experienced with the Sonic State podcast as well. Loads of interesting stuff goes on in fact, there's 3 different chat rooms of the Sonic State one as well. So it's impossible to get, and it's all this just flies. But at the same time, it's wonderful. One thing I just wanted to say just before we finish, though, is just a little bit of background about me and you. We first met at Superbooth 2018, I think it was, and had a couple of nights out, stayed up very late, drank lots and lots of beer, had a terrific time. And then last year as well, we've kind of set ourselves a little bit of a kind of I think this is a tradition that we're going to have to keep up now. So
I certainly hope so. It's been a ton of fun. Last year I was a little gimpy because I was still nursing my broken leg. But
that's right. What?
I certainly 2018 we pushed it maybe a little bit too far. Certainly one of those. I think we were out till 5 or 6 in the morning.
Yeah,
and I had to go to work the next day. But
yeah.
I think that's, and we were talking before we started streaming, we were talking about Superbooth a little bit. I think that's sort of the magic of Superbooth, though, is that Andreas has created this event it's not a trade show. It's almost a festival or sort of a gathering of the tribes. And it really is, for me, it's a great opportunity to hang out with my friends in the context of this great event without having the pressure. NAMM for me is there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of businessy things that have to happen. But I don't feel that. And I do that at Superbooth as well. But for some reason, he's created this event that lets you have, these wonderful, and I think what it is, as soon as the event's over for the day and I shut down my booth, there's still bands playing. And then, we take the boat back and the boat is a party. And then we go to C-Base, and C-Base doesn't close until people leave.
Yeah.
Which, coming from Pittsburgh where everything shuts down at 2, it boggles my mind that this place is just, if there's 5 people, they'll just stay open.
It's amazing.
That's been problematic for me in the past. But it creates, what you do is you do create a lot of friendships and you do have a lot of fun and you get into really, really deep, interesting conversations.
Absolutely.
For me, that's why you do this stuff.
There's a really nice sense of community. There's a really nice sense of lack of competition as well. And people are not kind of bitching about other people. All right. I don't really see that much of it. I mean, I guess little bits here and there, but not really. It really feels like there's a real sense of community, a real sense of, people being really happy that this kind of global community has come together, and and we're living in strange times, certainly politically, and all the kind of uncertainty that goes around with that this feeling of wow, all these people from all over the world, and we come together, and there's a that okay, I mean, lots of conversations about synthesizers, but conversations about life, the universe, and everything else. It spans, well, people say, what else is there to talk about? I always talk about synthesizers as the endless conversation. I mean, like, we're meant to be wrapping up now, but off we go again. But I was just going to say to any of the listeners, though, if you're thinking about Superbooth, or even if you're not thinking, in fact, I would even say if you're not thinking about Superbooth, think about Superbooth. Try and find a way to come. If you can find a way to come along, because it really is. It's a kind of, it's a life affirming thing. It's so much more than maybe, what you might think it is. It's, it really is something that is, you come away really elated and everybody I've talked to says the same thing as well. It's not just, this really is. So, I mean,
and especially if you've never been to Berlin or never been to Germany, they are the kindest, most wonderful people. I've fallen so hard in love with Berlin because of Superbooth that it's my favorite week of the year. It really is, because you go there and everyone is so nice and everyone's there, and even the people sort of outside of the Superbooth bubble. Everyone's willing to help. I try to speak my 3 words of German, and they kind of laugh at me, but then they can switch to English, and it's a lot of fun. It's an absolute beautiful city. The time of Superbooth, we've had some rain in the past, but last year was gorgeous, and hopefully this year it's nice as well. But yeah, if you've never been to Berlin or if you've never been to Germany and you're thinking, I like synthesizers, that's a great way to spend your vacation. Absolutely.
Yeah, please come along, and come along. You will not regret it. Absolutely not regret it. Well, you might wake up with a banging headache, but
you might regret it the next day, but the memories will last.
Oh, I got a nasty flu at the end of the, because I was up partying every single night till at least 5 or 6. Oof. And I was filming with Sonic at 10 a.m. every day. And I think I was just so blitzed by the end of it, but blitzed but happy, and So, well, maybe that's a good moment then, and because I will be seeing you in Superbooth.
At Superbooth, certainly. And again, thank you for coming on. Do you have anything you want to plug, or anything you want to tell anybody about?
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm just about to launch my first episode of a little series on my YouTube channel called LA Stories, which I stayed on in LA after NAMM this year, and went to arranged a whole bunch of crazy adventures, and I've some more crazy than others, but I've chronicled them with little videos. So I've got a little 5-part series, and the first part is going to be coming out in the next day or two on Gaz. That's not on Sonic State. That's going to be on Gaz Williams. That's my YouTube channel creator. And I've just made the most cheesiest intro little piece. So that's something to look at. But yeah, check that out. And what else? I think we've got a bunch of stuff coming out on Sonic as well. So yeah, I mean, as per usual, Sonic State, I think, is doing great stuff, really. Very, very happy to be involved with Sonic. I say my 10th anniversary this year of doing stuff with Sonic. So, and I'm really grateful to Nick and Andy Mack. You never really see him. He's behind the scenes, but he's a stalwart of Sonic State alongside Nick. But yeah, so very, very, very pleased that that's an ongoing thing. And as I say, a whole bunch of stuff going to be coming out on that soon. But thanks ever so much. I really enjoyed this, and the information is invaluable, and I'm really thankful for that. So yes, thank you very much.
Nice. Well, it seems like the live chat seems to want us to do a follow up in a couple months. So maybe we'll get together in a couple months, and we'll see how things are going along, and
please,
we'll tackle the middle section of your journey into the modular world.
Well, I will definitely have new stuff to report then. So that would be, I would absolutely love that. And again, thanks ever so much for having me on, and to everyone who's tuned in.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for being the first guest ever on whatever this is. Woo-hoo! And I appreciate it. And I'm going to shut the stream off now. Thanks everyone in the chat for hanging out. Thanks for everyone that's just watching and doesn't want to chat. That's okay too. I'm going to shut the stream off now if I can figure out how. Thank you very much.
Hey.